To understand the split brain phenomenon, let's start with a quick overview of brain anatomy. The brain is divided into cortical and subcortical structures. The outermost region is known as the cortical lobes, and they support complex mental functions like problem-solving, speech, and perception. They include the frontal, temporal, occipital, parietal, and insular lobes. The brain's lobes each have distinct functions. The frontal lobe, located behind the forehead, handles motor control, decision-making, problem-solving, and personality. It also controls speech production and regulates emotions. The temporal lobe on the brain's sides processes sound, aids in memory, and helps with language comprehension as well as recognizing faces and objects. The occipital lobe at the back is responsible for visual processing, interpreting input from the eyes. The parietal lobe near the top integrates sensory information like touch and spatial awareness. Finally, the insular lobe, hidden deep in the brain, is involved in emotions, internal bodily sensations, and self-awareness. It connects physical sensations with emotional experiences. Then we have the subcortical brain, which lies beneath the cortex. These structures play crucial roles in emotion, memory, and motivation. The basal ganglia is involved in motor control and habit formation, while the thalamus acts as the brain's relay station, directing sensory and motor signals to the cortex. The hypothalamus regulates hunger, thirst, temperature, and sleep, maintaining the body's internal balance or homeostasis. Together, these parts allow us to move, think, feel, and survive. But how do the two sides of the brain, the left and right hemispheres, coordinate these functions? That's where the corpus callosum comes in. The corpus callosum is the largest bundle of nerve fibers in the brain, containing around 200 million axons. This structure acts as a bridge between the left and right hemisphere, allowing them to communicate and share information. Without the corpus callosum, the hemispheres would struggle to work together. An example for this would be tasks that require both language and spatial awareness, such as reading a map. This would be much harder to manage without that communication. Callosal connectivity ensures that both sides of the brain stay in sync. The left hemisphere typically handles tasks like language, logic, and math, while the right hemisphere excels in spatial reasoning, creativity, and recognizing faces. The corpus callosum helps integrate these functions, giving us a unified sense of thought and action. Now let's talk about what happens when the corpus callosum is severed, a condition known as split brain. In some cases, particularly to treat severe epilepsy, doctors may surgically cut the corpus callosum to prevent seizures from spreading between hemispheres. This procedure is called corpus callosotomy. It's where they isolate the two halves of the brain. While the procedure can drastically reduce seizures, it also reveals some fascinating things about how our brain works. In split brain patients, the left and right hemispheres can no longer communicate directly. Surprisingly, patients often seem to function normally at first glance, but when you look closer, you'll see that each hemisphere operates independently. This independence can lead to unique behaviors. For instance, in experiments, split brain patients were shown objects to only one hemisphere, say to the right visual field, which is processed by the left hemisphere. The patient could verbally describe the object, but when shown in the left visual field, processed by the right hemisphere, they couldn't name it, even though they could still draw it. This happens because the left hemisphere responsible for language doesn't receive the information directly from the right hemisphere. The study of split brain has provided incredible insights into brain lateralization, the idea that the two hemispheres have specialized functions. Researchers like Roger Sperry, who conducted split brain experiments in the 1950s, discovered that even though the two hemispheres can work independently, they need to communicate to fully integrate complex tasks. In one of Sperry's famous experiments, cats underwent surgery where the corpus callosum was severed, and they were trained to perform tasks using only one eye. The trained behavior did not transfer when the untrained eye was used. This showed that the information processed by one hemisphere couldn't be shared with the other. Later experiments with human patients demonstrated similar results. In one test, patients were shown pictures of faces to one hemisphere. The right hemisphere, which specializes in facial recognition, could identify the face, but the left hemisphere, responsible for verbal descriptions, couldn't. One of the key findings in split brain research is the impact of an emotional and social functions. Patients with agenesis of the corpus callosum often have difficulty recognizing emotions, especially from facial expressions. In emotional recognition tests, these patients tend to focus on less expressive parts of the face like the nose rather than the eyes. As a result, they can struggle to interpret emotional cues in social situations. This leads to deficits in social understanding, particularly when trying to process the subtleties of interpersonal interactions. Because the hemispheres aren't sharing information properly, patients can't compare stimuli across visual fields, which makes recognizing emotions or understanding social scenarios more challenging. Split brain can result from several causes in addition to surgical interventions. Conditions like agenesis of corpus callosum can develop due to genetic factors, chromosomal anomalies, or environmental factors such as infections or toxic exposure during pregnancy. In fact, about 45% of split brain causes are linked to identifiable genetic causes. The corpus callosum begins developing at around 12 weeks post-conception and reaches its final shape by 20 weeks. However, structural changes continue into adolescence. Agenesis of the corpus callosum, which refers to the complete absence of the structure, often comes with other developmental issues. Interestingly, despite the challenges split brain patients face, many adapt well to their condition. Over time, they develop strategies to compensate for the lack of communication between hemispheres. However, tasks that require integrated thinking, like multitasking or complex decision making, can remain difficult. While most split brain patients live relatively normal lives, they may experience difficulty with tasks like reading emotions, processing language, or interpreting spatial information. These are all tasks that typically rely on the coordinated efforts of both hemispheres. So what have we learned? The split brain phenomenon has not only provided a deeper understanding of how the brain's hemispheres work, but it's also opened the door to new questions about consciousness, identity, and how we interpret the world. The corpus callosum plays a vital role in keeping our mental processes unified, and when it's severed or absent, we see just how specialized and independent our brain's hemispheres can be.